A little girl tells a mafia boss he's her father, a claim that unearths a dangerous past. To protect his newfound family, he must confront old enemies and impossible choices. Can a man of violence build a life of peace? If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The air in the opulent cafe, Rosso e Nero, smelled of expensive espresso and power. Marco Valenti, known to the underworld as the Wolf, was discussing the shipment of illegal arms with his consigliere, David, his voice a low, commanding rumble that brooked no argument. The world bent to that voice. Men feared it. Then, a small, high-pitched one cut through it like a shard of glass. "Mister?" Marco's cold, dark eyes, which had just been scrutinizing a financial report, flickered downward. A child, no more than 4 or 5, with a head of riotous chestnut curls, stood beside his table clutching a well-loved teddy bear. She was a tiny, bright splash of colour in his monochrome world of shadows and blood money. David shifted, a hand moving instinctively towards his concealed weapon, but Marco gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He found himself disarmed, a strange sensation he hadn't experienced in years. "Yes, little one?" he asked, his voice softening despite himself. "Are you lost?" The little girl shook her head, her big, hazel eyes, the colour of warmed honey, studying his face with an unnerving intensity. "I think you're my daddy." The words, so simple, so innocently delivered, hit Marco with the force of a sledgehammer. The air left his lungs. The bustling sounds of the cafe faded into a dull roar. He could feel David's stunned silence beside him. His empire, built on fear and control, teetered on the precipice of a single, childish sentence. "My... what?" Marco managed to whisper, his throat tight. "My daddy," she repeated, a small, hopeful smile playing on her lips. "You look like the picture Mama keeps in her secret box. She cries when she looks at it sometimes." A secret box. Crying. Marco's mind, usually a fortress of strategy and cold calculation, was suddenly under siege by a ghost from a past he had meticulously buried. His gaze, almost against his will, snapped up from the child's face, scanning the cafe like a predator searching for the source of a disturbance. And then he saw her. Sophia. She was frozen near the entrance, her hand clutching the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face, the same face that had haunted his dreams for 5 long years, was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The sight of her, more beautiful than he remembered even in her panic, made his heart clench violently. He had orchestrated the most brutal betrayal to make her run, to make her hate him, to save her from the poison of his world. He had believed she was safe, living a life far away from him, free from the danger he represented. But she was here. And the little girl, their daughter. The blood drained from his face. He went pale, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. The file in his hand slipped from his numb fingers, scattering papers across the polished marble floor. His sacrifice had been for nothing. The lie he had built to protect her had been a cage for them both, and it had just been shattered by a child's truth. "Mama!" The little girl, Lily, he would soon learn her name was Lily, called out, turning and waving. Sophia seemed to break from her trance. She rushed forward, her movements jerky with fear. She scooped Lily into her arms, holding her tightly, her eyes locked on Marco's. They were the same eyes he remembered, deep and expressive, but now they were filled with a storm of emotions, fear, anger, and a pain so profound it stole his breath. "I'm so sorry she got away from me for just a second," Sophia stammered, her voice trembling. She wouldn't look at him directly, her focus entirely on creating a barrier between her daughter and the man she believed was a monster. Marco stood up, his 6'3" frame towering, but for the first time he felt unsteady. "Sophia," he said, her name a prayer and a curse on his lips. It was the first time he had spoken it aloud in 5 years. Her flinch was barely perceptible, but he saw it. He saw everything about her. David rose beside him, a silent, imposing presence. "Boss?" he murmured, his eyes scanning the room for threats. Marco ignored him. His entire world had shrunk to the woman and the child in front of him. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice low, rough with an emotion he couldn't name. Sophia finally met his gaze, and the defiance in her eyes was a pale shield over her terror. "I don't know what you're talking about. Come on, Lily, we have to go." "But Mama, it's Daddy," Lily protested, little hands clinging to her mother's coat. "Let them go," Marco commanded David softly, his eyes never leaving Sophia. He saw the confusion warring with the fear on her face. She had expected violence, threats, cruelty. She had not expected him to let her walk away. As Sophia hurried out of the cafe, clutching their daughter, Marco watched them disappear into the sunlight of the street, a world he had forfeited. He stood there, a king in his dark castle watching his lost kingdom walk away. "Find out where they live," he ordered David, his voice once again the cold, hard steel of the wolf. "Everything. I want to know everything. And get me everything on the Rossi family. It's time we finished this." Back in his penthouse, surrounded by the sterile luxury of his life, Marco felt the walls closing in. He poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to burn away the image of Sophia's terrified eyes or the sound of a little girl calling him Daddy. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the city he controlled. It felt hollow, meaningless. He thought of that summer 5 years ago. He had been a younger, harder man, but Sophia had found the cracks in his armor. She was an art restorer, working on a piece for one of his fronts. She was light and laughter and everything good. He would sneak away from his duties, from the violence, just to watch her work, to listen to her talk about brushstrokes and history. For a few stolen months, he had been just Marco, not the wolf, and he had loved her. He had loved her so much that the thought of his world touching hers was unbearable. The Rossi family had been making a move. They had discovered his weakness. A whispered threat, a photo of Sophia leaving her studio left on his car. He knew then what he had to do. He couldn't just send her away. They would find her. She had to run, to hide, to want to disappear. So he had staged the most painful performance of his life. He let her find him in a compromising situation with another woman, a paid actress. He had been cold, cruel, telling Sophia she was a distraction, a passing amusement. He had seen the light in her eyes die, and it had shattered him. She had left that night, and he had made sure she had enough money, a new identity, all from the shadows, ensuring her trail went cold. He never knew about the pregnancy, the thought that she had gone through that alone, that he had a child, a daughter. It was an agony worse than any bullet wound. A soft knock came at the door. David entered, a file in his hand. They live in a modest apartment in the North End. She works at the City Museum. The girl, Lily, is 4. She's enrolled in a local kindergarten. David paused, his expression grim. And the Rossi family. Our intelligence suggests they've been quiet, but they've been rebuilding. There are whispers, Marco. Whispers that they know about the girl. Marco's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a feral light. What? It's unconfirmed, but the source is reliable. They may be planning to use her as leverage. That was it. The final piece. The reason his carefully constructed lie had now become a death sentence. His family was a target, and he was the only one who could protect them. But how could he get close without terrifying Sophia further? How could he convince the woman he had shattered that he was now her only salvation? The next day, he stood across the street from the museum where Sophia worked. He saw her emerge holding Lily's hand, their heads close together as they talked. The sight was a physical ache in his chest. He waited until they were a block away, walking towards their apartment before he moved. He fell into step beside them. Sophia gasped, pulling Lily closer to her side. "Get away from us," she hissed, her voice trembling. "I can't do that, Sophia," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. It was all a lie, remember? You made that very clear." "Not everything," he said, his eyes flicking to Lily, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. "Please, just 5 minutes. For her safety." The mention of Lily's safety made Sophia hesitate. She looked from his desperate, earnest face to her daughter's. 5 minutes, she relented, her voice tight. "There's a park up ahead." They sat on a secluded bench, Lily playing on the swings within sight. The silence between them was heavy with 5 years of hurt. "Why are you here, Marco?" Sophia asked, her arms crossed over her chest. You made your choice. We were a distraction. Your words. He turned to her, and for the first time he let her see the raw, unvarnished truth in his eyes. He let the mask of the wolf slip, revealing the man she had once loved, a man haunted and broken. It was a lie, Sophia. Every single word of it. She stared at him, disbelief warring with a flicker of something else, a tiny, fragile hope. What? The Rossi family, he said, the name a venomous hiss. They had a picture of you. They knew you were my weakness. They threatened to take you, to hurt you, to make me watch. The only way I could make you safe was to make you leave, to make you hate me so much you would never, ever come back. I had to make you disappear. Sophia's breath hitched, her defensive posture softened just a fraction. You pushed me away to protect me. I destroyed us to save you, he whispered, the confession tearing from him. I have lived with that decision every single day since. I never knew about Lily. I swear to you, Sophia, if I had known... Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing paths down her cheeks. I was pregnant and alone. I thought the man I loved saw me as nothing. It broke me, Marco. I am so sorry, he said, the words inadequate, but filled with a lifetime of regret. But I need you to listen to me now. The threat isn't gone. The Rossis are still out there, and they know about Lily. They know she's my daughter. The colour drained from Sophia's face. No. Yes. They will use her to get to me. Your life, her life, is in imminent danger. You are not safe here. What are you saying? She whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for his, a ghost of the connection they once shared. I'm saying you have to let me protect you. Both of you. I have a safe house. It's a fortress. Please, Sophia, let me fix this. Let me be the father I was never allowed to be. Let me keep you safe. He looked at her, his heart laid bare. The powerful Mafia boss was on his knees begging for a second chance, not just for love, but for their very survival. The wind rustled the leaves around them, and the sound of Lily's laughter from the swings felt both incredibly close and terrifyingly fragile. Sophia looked from his desperate, pleading eyes to their daughter, the living proof of a love he had tried to erase. She was trapped between the memory of his brutal betrayal and the terrifying reality of his current warning. Her world, which had only just begun to stabilize, was being torn apart all over again. But this time, the monster wasn't at the door. He was on the bench beside her, offering a shield, his own eyes reflecting the same fear she felt. She took a shaky breath, her decision hovering in the space between them, a single word that would change all of their futures forever. Okay, she whispered. The transition to the safe house was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Marco's men, led by the ever-stoic David, moved with a brutal efficiency that left Sophia breathless. Within an hour of her whispered agreement, they were in a blacked-out SUV, speeding away from her life. Lily, confused but excited by the adventure, chattered in the back seat, while Sophia sat in tense silence beside Marco. The safe house was not a house at all, but a sleek, modern penthouse atop a nondescript building that housed several of Marco's legitimate businesses. The elevator required a keycard and a retinal scan. The door was reinforced steel, disguised as polished wood. Inside, it was spacious and luxurious, but the security was omnipresent. Cameras, motion sensors, a panic room disguised as a walk-in closet. This is excessive, Sophia murmured, placing her bag down. It's necessary, Marco replied, his gaze sweeping the room, checking sightlines, assessing threats even here in his own fortress. David will be stationed outside. There are 2 other men on rotation. No one gets in or out without my authorization. Lily ran to the large window, pressing her hands against the glass. We're so high up, Mama. Look at all the tiny cars. Sophia forced a smile for her daughter before turning back to Marco. How long? Until the Rossi family is no longer a threat, he said, his voice grim. I'm dealing with it. Dealing with it? What does that mean, Marco? She asked, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. More violence? Is that how this ends? He stepped closer and she could see the tired lines around his eyes, the weight of his crown of thorns. It's the only language they understand, Sophia. This world, it's not one of negotiation. It's one of power, and I have to show them that my power extends to protecting what's mine. The possessive word, mine, should have frightened her. Instead, a treacherous part of her heart, the part that had never fully healed, clenched with a sense of belonging. She pushed the feeling down. The first few days were a tense, awkward dance. Marco was often gone, handling his business, but when he was there, he tried. He was a ghost in their new life, trying to become solid again. He watched Lily with a kind of rapt, bewildered awe, as if she were a mythical creature he'd only read about. One evening, Sophia was reading to Lily in the living room when Marco came home. He looked tired, his knuckles bruised. He stopped in the doorway, just watching them. "Daddy's home," Lily chirped, scrambling off the sofa and running to him. Sophia's heart stopped. "Lily, no," she started, but it was too late. Marco froze as the small body collided with his legs, tiny arms wrapping around them. He looked down at the crown of chestnut curls, his hands hovering awkwardly in the air, as if afraid to touch her, to stain her with his touch. He slowly, so slowly, knelt down. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice rough. "Did you have a good day at work?" she asked, parroting a question she must have heard Sophia ask a friend. Marco's eyes met Sophia's over their daughter's head. A world of darkness was in that look. "It was productive," he said carefully. "Will you read me a story? Mama does the voices, but she says you have a good voice for stories." Sophia held her breath. This was it. The moment the wolf would snarl, the illusion would shatter. But Marco just nodded, a strange soft light in his eyes. "I can try." He sat on the floor, his large, powerful frame looking absurdly out of place against the pink rug, and took the book from Lily. He began to read a tale of a brave knight and a dragon. His voice, which commanded armies of hardened criminals, was low and gentle, stumbling over the silly names but trying, really trying to do the voices. Lily curled into his side, listening with rapt attention. Sophia felt a crack in the wall around her heart. She saw the man she had fallen in love with, buried under the armor of the wolf. He was in there, trying to find his way out for their daughter. Later, after Lily was asleep, Sophia found Marco on the terrace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the city lights. "Thank you," she said softly, joining him at the railing, "for reading to her." He didn't look at her. "She's incredible, Sophia. You've done an amazing job with her. We've managed." The silence stretched, filled with the hum of the city below. "I meant what I said in the park," he said finally, turning to face her. The raw honesty in his gaze was disarming. "I have lived with the regret of what I did to you every day. I thought I was saving you. I was just condemning us both to a different kind of hell." "Why are you telling me this now?" she whispered, the night air cool on her heated skin. "Because seeing you with her, being near you again, it's like waking up from a 5-year coma. I feel everything again, and it's terrifying." He took a step closer. "I am still the man who did that to you. I am still the wolf. This life, the violence, it's a part of me. I can't give it up. It's not an empire you walk away from. You either rule it or you die. But for you, for her, I want to be more. I want to be the man worthy of that little girl calling me Daddy." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. This was the confession she had needed 5 years ago. This was the truth that could have changed everything. Now, it was a complicated, dangerous promise. "Marco," she began, but her voice failed her. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The contact was electric, a jolt of memory and longing that shot through her entire body. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I'm just asking for a chance to protect you, and maybe, if it's not too late, to show you that the love was never a lie." He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone, and she leaned into the touch, her resolve crumbling. The years of anger and hurt melted away under the intensity of his gaze. He was a storm, and she was tired of fighting the current. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't. She rose onto her toes and met him halfway. The kiss was not like the passionate, frantic ones of their youth. It was slower, deeper, a rediscovery. It was a kiss of grief for lost time, of hope for a fragile future, and of a love that had been bent but never broken. It tasted of whiskey, of tears, and of a second chance that felt as dangerous as it did divine. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, the city lights blurred in Sophia's tear-filled vision. "It was never a lie for me, either," she confessed softly, her forehead resting against his. "I never stopped." A look of profound relief and hope washed over Marco's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if she were the only solid thing in his shifting world. In that moment, on the terrace high above the city, they were not a Mafia boss and his lost love. They were just Marco and Sophia, finding their way back to each other in the wreckage he had created. But downstairs in the command center David had set up, a red light began to blink on a monitor. A car had been spotted circling the block for the third time. The license plate was registered to a shell corporation with known ties to the Rossi family. The wolf had found his family, but the hunters had found his den. David's voice, tight and urgent, crackled through the intercom system a moment later, shattering the fragile peace of the terrace. "Marco, we have a situation." Marco's body went rigid against hers. The shift was instantaneous and terrifying. The softness in his eyes vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating gleam of the wolf. The man who had just kissed her with such tender desperation was gone, and the Don had taken his place. "What is it?" Marco's voice was a whip crack. "A car, dark sedan, third pass in 10 minutes, Rossi plates." Sophia felt a cold dread trickle down her spine. "They're here? They found us already?" Marco's arm tightened around her, a gesture of both protection and possession. "They were probably watching your apartment. They followed us." He cursed, a low, vicious sound. "I was careless. I was too focused on you." He looked at her, his expression grim. "Go inside. Stay away from the windows." He strode back into the living room, his phone already to his ear. Sophia followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched as he transformed before her eyes. He was issuing commands in a low, rapid-fire Italian she couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. This was war. For the next 48 hours, the penthouse became both a sanctuary and a prison. The tension was a living entity, thick enough to taste. Marco was a constant, prowling presence. He barely slept, his attention divided between the security feeds on his tablet and the two females he was protecting. He was gentle with Lily, his voice always soft when he spoke to her, but Sophia could see the storm raging behind his eyes. The threat was close, too close. Lily, perceptive as children often are, felt the change in the atmosphere. She became quieter, clinging more to Sophia and watching Marco with wide, uncertain eyes. On the third morning, Marco was called away. An emergency meeting with his capos, he explained, a strategic move he had to make in person. "David and 2 others will be right outside the door. The place is a vault. Do not open it for anyone but me. Do you understand, Sophia?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The kiss they had shared felt like a lifetime ago. He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her jawline once, a fleeting echo of their intimacy. "I will be back before dinner," he promised. Then he was gone, and the heavy steel door clicked shut, locking them in. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Sophia tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Lily, playing games and reading books, but her ears were constantly straining for any sound from the hallway. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, made her jump. It was during Lily's afternoon nap that it happened. A soft, rhythmic tapping came from the front door. Tap, 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 tap. Sophia froze, her blood running cold. It wasn't the doorbell. It was a pattern. She crept closer, her heart in her throat. She peered through the high-tech peephole, which showed a wide-angle view of the hallway. David stood there. He gave a small, tense smile and repeated the pattern. Tap, 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 tap. Relief, sweet and overwhelming, flooded her. It was the all-clear signal Marco had taught her. He must have sent David back to check on them. Her hand went to the complex series of deadbolts. She unlocked the first one, then the second. As her hand touched the third and final bolt, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her relief. Something was wrong. David's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a grimace. And his posture was too rigid. "David?" she called out through the door, her voice trembling. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Sophia," his voice came back, flat and strained. "Open the door. Marco sent me." But Marco had been explicit. "Do not open it for anyone but me." Her hand froze on the bolt. That's when she saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible bead of sweat trickling down David's temple, and, behind him, just at the edge of the peephole's range, a shadow moved. Oh, God. She stumbled back from the door, her breath catching in a silent sob. It was a trap. David wasn't here of his own free will. The Rossis had him. A split second later, a deafening roar filled the hallway. The reinforced steel door shuddered violently in its frame as something heavy slammed into it from the other side. A battering ram. Lily's terrified scream echoed from the bedroom. "Mama!" Sophia ran, her legs feeling like water. She sprinted into the bedroom, scooped a crying Lily into her arms, and dashed for the panic room, the walk-in closet. She slammed the hidden button disguised as a light switch. The heavy, soundproof door, lined with Kevlar, began to slide shut just as the main door to the penthouse exploded inward with a shriek of tearing metal. From the narrowing slit of the closing panic room door, Sophia saw 3 men storm inside. They were not Marco's polished professional soldiers. These men were rough, dressed in dark utilitarian clothing, their faces hard. And they were holding a battered, bloodied David at gunpoint. He had been their key, their tool to get through the first line of defense. The panic room door sealed with a definitive, chilling thud. The world went silent. They were safe. For now. Sophia held a sobbing Lily, rocking her back and forth in the dim, climate-controlled air. "Shh, baby, it's okay. We're safe in here. Daddy's safe room." But her mind was racing. They were trapped. The Rossis were in the penthouse, and Marco was out there, unaware that his fortress had been breached. Marco felt the disturbance in the fabric of his world before his phone even buzzed. He was in a dimly lit back room of a social club, the air thick with cigar smoke and quiet tension. 4 of his most loyal capos were gathered around the table, finalizing the plan to systematically dismantle the Rossi operations. His phone vibrated, a specific, urgent pattern. It was the alarm from the penthouse, the one linked to the front door. His blood went cold. He held up a hand, silencing the room. He pulled out his phone. The security app showed the front door camera feed was dead. Static. The feed from the living room cameras flickered, then died. Someone was jamming the signal. "The penthouse," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They're at the penthouse." He didn't wait for a response. He was already moving, a force of nature unleashed. His men scrambled to follow, chairs scraping against the floor. The drive back was a blur of speed and running red lights, Marco's knuckles white on the steering wheel. Visions of Sophia and Lily, terrified, hurt, flooded his mind, threatening to unravel his control. The wolf was not just angry, he was feral with fear. He burst into the building's lobby, his men fanning out behind him. The 2 guards he had posted were gone. A bad sign. The private elevator was inoperable, its controls smashed. "Stairs!" he barked. They took the stairs 2 and 3 at a time, a whirlwind of violence ascending. When they reached the penthouse floor, the scene was one of carnage. The beautiful, reinforced door was a mangled wreck hanging off its hinges. One of his men lay in the hallway, unconscious, but breathing. The other was nowhere to be seen. Marco stepped through the wreckage, his gun drawn. The living room was trashed, furniture was overturned, a lamp was shattered. And in the center of the room, held by 2 of the Rossi soldiers, was David. His face was a bloody mess, one eye swollen shut, but he was conscious. His gaze met Marco's, filled with a profound, gut-wrenching shame. "I'm sorry, boss," David rasped. "They took my family. They made me—" Marco's eyes swept the room. There were 4 Rossi men. The leader, a hulking brute with a scar down his cheek, smiled, his gun pointed directly at David's head. "Valenti," the brute said, "we just want the girl. Give us the kid, and we leave. Your consigliere lives. Simple." Marco's expression didn't change. He was ice. "The girl is not a bargaining chip. Then he dies." Time seemed to slow down. Marco's mind, a supercomputer of violence, calculated the angles, the probabilities. He could take 2, maybe 3 before they got a shot off. But David would be the first to die. His eyes flickered to the master bedroom door. It was closed. The panic room was behind it. They were safe. They were watching, he realized. Sophia would be watching the internal camera feed on the panic room's monitor. She would see this. She would see what he was. "You work for a weak old man," Marco said, his voice a low, conversational calm that was more terrifying than any shout. "A man who sends others to do his dirty work. A man who threatens children." He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "I am not that man." His movement was a blur. The gun in his hand spat fire twice. 2 perfect shots. The men holding David's arms crumpled, holes blossoming in their foreheads. Before the brute could react, Marco had closed the distance. He didn't shoot him. He slammed the butt of his pistol into the man's temple, then grabbed his gun hand, twisting it at a sickening angle until the bones snapped. The man screamed. Marco drove his knee into his gut, then shoved him to the ground, placing a foot on his throat. The entire exchange took less than 4 seconds. Marco looked down at the choking man, his face a mask of cold fury. "You came into my home. You threatened my daughter." He pressed down harder. "Tell your boss the wolf is coming for him. Tell him his bloodline ends with him." He didn't kill him. He wanted a messenger. He gestured to one of his men who dragged the gasping Rossi soldier out into the hall. The room fell silent save for David's ragged breathing. Marco walked over to him, holstering his weapon. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked at him, his gaze unreadable. "Your family?" Marco asked. "They have them. My wife. My boy." Marco gave a single sharp nod. "We'll get them back." He turned towards the master bedroom. "Now, I need to see my family." Inside the panic room, Sophia had watched it all on the monitor. She had seen the cold, brutal efficiency of the violence. She had seen the man she loved transform into a lethal weapon. She had been terrified, but a strange, primal part of her had felt protected. He was a monster, but he was their monster. When the panic room door hissed open, Marco stood there, his chest heaving, his knuckles raw and bloody. The scent of gunpowder and violence clung to him. His eyes found hers, and for a heartbreaking moment she saw the fear in them, the fear that she would look at him and see only a murderer. Lily, however, saw only her daddy. She broke free from Sophia's grasp and ran to him, burying her face in his legs. "Daddy, you scared the bad men away." Marco's tough exterior shattered. He knelt, gathering Lily into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. He looked over her shoulder at Sophia, his eyes pleading for understanding. Sophia walked towards them slowly. She didn't flinch from the blood on his hands. She reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers gentle against his skin. She saw it all now, the brutal truth of his world, and the even more brutal love that drove him. He had built this prison of power to keep them safe, and he would burn down the entire city to protect them. "It's over," she whispered. Marco shook his head, his hold on Lily tightening. "No, amore mio. It's just beginning." He was right. The war was now open, and Marco Valenti was no longer just fighting for his empire. He was fighting for his soul, for the chance to be the man his daughter believed him to be, and for the woman whose love was his only path to redemption. The final battle was looming, and the price of victory would be everything. The silence in the penthouse was heavier than before, thick with the ghosts of violence and the scent of cordite. The broken door was boarded up, a temporary patch on a gaping wound. Lily, exhausted from terror and relief, had finally fallen into a fitful sleep in her new bedroom, clutching the teddy bear Marco had bought her. Sophia tucked her in, her hands trembling long after the child's breathing evened out. She walked back into the living room where Marco stood, his back to her, staring at the city lights as if they were a battlefield map. David was gone, patched up and dispatched to a secure location, the weight of his failure and his family's peril a new heavy chain around his neck. "He blames himself," Sophia said softly, coming to stand beside him. "He should," Marco replied, his voice hollow. "But the blame is mine. I allowed this. I became comfortable in my power and forgot the first rule. There is always someone hungrier, more desperate." He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "I saw your face when you opened that door. You saw what I am. I saw a father protecting his child, she said, her voice firm despite the fear still coiling in her stomach. I saw a man who would tear the world apart for his family. Don't romanticize it, Sophia, he warned, a bitter edge to his words. What you saw was a predator, a killer. That violence, it's the currency of my life. It's how I speak to men like Rossi. And it's the only language he will understand now. So what happens next? She asked, dreading the answer. Next, he said, his gaze turning outwards again, sharp and focused. I finish this. For good. Not with a warning. Not with a truce. I end the Rossi bloodline. The cold finality in his tone made her shiver. Marco. There is no other way, he interrupted, finally looking at her. The conflict in his eyes was a raging storm. As long as old man Rossi draws breath, you and Lily are not safe. As long as his son, that cowardly worm, is alive to inherit his vendetta, my daughter will have to look over her shoulder for the rest of her life. I will not have that. I will not have her live in the shadow I created. He walked to a safe embedded in the wall, hidden behind a painting. He punched in a code and retrieved a simple worn velvet box. He came back to her and opened it. Inside, nestled on the dark fabric, was a ring. It wasn't the gaudy, flashy piece she might have expected. It was elegant, a single flawless emerald-cut diamond set on a platinum band. I bought this 5 years ago, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The day before I made you leave. I was going to ask you to marry me, to build a life with me. I was a fool to think I could have that and this. He gestured vaguely at the room, at the city beyond, at his empire. I was a fool to think I could keep you safe in a world of fire by standing next to you. He took the ring out of the box. He didn't get down on one knee. He stood before her, a king offering his crown, his vulnerability his greatest strength. I am offering you that life now, Sophia, a life with me. But to have it, I must first descend deeper into the darkness than I ever have before. I must become the wolf completely, one last time, to ensure he can never threaten our family again. So I am asking you, look at me, look at what I have to do, at what I am, and tell me if you can still see the man you loved. Tell me if you will still be here when I return. Tears streamed down Sophia's face, silent and warm. This was the choice. This was the crossroads. She could take Lily and run, as she had before. She could try to find a shadow deep enough to hide from both Marco and his enemies. Or she could accept him. All of him. The lover and the killer. The father and the Don. She looked at his hand, the one holding the ring. The knuckles were still bruised and split. She thought of the cold precision in his eyes when he'd taken down those men, and then the devastating tenderness in them when he'd held their daughter. He was not a monster. He was a man forged in a monstrous world, and his love was as absolute as his violence. She placed her hand in his. The man I loved never left, she whispered. And I am not going anywhere. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled her into a fierce, desperate kiss, a seal on a promise written in blood and hope. When they parted, his resolve was absolute, his path clear. Lock the door behind me, he said. The new one is stronger. The war was swift, brutal, and absolute. Marco Valenti, with the cold fury of a man who had everything to lose, unleashed hell. It was not a street war of spraying bullets and collateral damage. It was a surgical decapitation. He started with the Rossi finances. By morning, through a series of ruthless maneuvers and calls to favours in high and low places, he had frozen their assets, called in their loans, and collapsed their legitimate fronts. He then systematically targeted their illegal operations. Shipments were intercepted by the authorities, tipped off anonymously. Key distributors were offered a choice: swear fealty to Valenti or face imprisonment or worse. Most chose to switch sides. The old boss, Vincenzo Rossi, was a cornered animal, holed up in his fortified estate on the outskirts of the city. His son, Alfredo, the architect of the plan to take Lily, was panicking, screaming about making a deal. There would be no deals. That night, Marco went to the estate alone. He didn't need an army. He was a spectre, a rumour given form. He moved through the shadows of the elaborate gardens, disabling guards with silent, efficient brutality. He wasn't there for a massacre, he was there for a message. He found Alfredo first in the billiards room, trying to steady his shaking hands with a glass of whiskey. Marco stepped out of the darkness. "You," Alfredo gasped, fumbling for a gun on the table. Marco was faster. He crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed Alfredo's head against the felt of the pool table, holding him there. "You threatened my daughter," Marco whispered, his voice like gravel. "You sent men into my home." "It was just business," Alfredo choked out. "This is not business," Marco said. "This is personal." He didn't. Marco found Vincenzo Rossi in his study, an old man sitting behind a massive oak desk, a vintage pistol lying in front of him. He looked up as Marco entered, his face a mask of bitter resignation. "Valenti," he rasped. "You have won. Take my empire. It is yours." "I don't want your empire," Marco said, his voice calm. "I have my own. I want your word." "My word?" The old man laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "What value does that have now?" "It's the only thing that will keep your son alive," Marco said, his eyes locked on the old man's. "You will call your remaining captains. You will tell them the war is over. You will tell them that the Rossi family is dissolved. You and your broken son will leave this country. You will never return. You will never speak my name again. You will never ever think of my wife or my daughter. If you do, the mercy I show you tonight will be a forgotten memory." Vincenzo Rossi stared at the young king who had dethroned him. He saw no bluff, no negotiation. He saw only the absolute certainty of his own end and the end of his legacy. He had played the game his whole life, and he had finally met a player for whom the game was not about money or power, but about love, and that made him unstoppable. The old man's shoulders slumped. He nodded slowly. "It is done." Marco didn't another word. He turned and walked out, leaving the once powerful Don in the ruins of his life. He had not taken a throne. He had secured a future. The first light of dawn was breaking over the city when Marco returned to the penthouse. He was weary to his bones, the scent of violence still clinging to him like a shroud. Sophia was waiting for him in the living room, wrapped in a robe, her engagement ring glinting in the soft light. She didn't ask if he was okay. She looked into his eyes and saw the storm had passed. She saw the cost etched on his face. "Is it over?" she asked softly. "It's over," he confirmed, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The Rossis are finished. They're gone." He walked to the window, looking out at the city he now ruled unquestionably. It felt different. It was no longer just his kingdom. It was the walls that protected his family. "I used to look out at this city and see territories, profits, power," he said, almost to himself. "Now, all I see is the world I have to keep at bay for her. For you." Sophia came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You don't have to keep it all at bay alone anymore." He turned to her, and for the first time since Lily had spoken those life-altering words in the cafe, the ghost of a true, peaceful smile touched his lips. David's family is safe. They're being brought to a safe house now. The final weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. The debt was paid. The circle was closed. Weeks turned into months. The new door was installed, stronger than the last. Life, a new, cautious kind of life, began to take root within the secure walls. Marco still conducted his business, but the late nights became fewer. He was home for dinner. He helped Lily with her letters, his large, capable hands gently guiding her small ones. He read her stories every night, his voice now confident and warm, doing all the voices. One evening, they were in the garden on the penthouse terrace, a secure glass-enclosed space filled with plants Sophia was cultivating. Lily was chasing fireflies in a jar, her laughter like bells on the night air. Marco stood with his arms around Sophia, his chin resting on her head, watching their daughter. "Daddy," Lily called out, running up to them, her jar glowing. "Look, I caught a piece of stars." Marco knelt down, his eyes soft. "They're beautiful, Piccolina. Just like you." Are you still the boss of the whole city? She asked, her head tilted with childish curiosity. Marco glanced up at Sophia, a world of understanding passing between them. He looked back at his daughter. No, Lily, he said, his voice filled with a profound and quiet certainty. I'm just your daddy. And in that moment, Marco Valenti knew he had won the only empire that would ever truly matter. He had traded a crown of fear for a kingdom of the heart, and he was finally, completely, home. Did this mafia boss deserve his happy ending? Thank you for watching. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. For more stories where love conquers a dark past, hit subscribe.